Our gospel this morning is the Gospel of Matthew, the 3rd chapter. Jesus came from Galilee to John at the Jordan to be baptized by him. John would have prevented him, saying, "I need to be baptized by you, and do you come to me?" But Jesus answered him, "Let it be so now. For it is proper for us in this way to fulfill all righteousness." And then he consented. And when Jesus had been baptized, just as he came up from the water, suddenly the heavens were opened to him, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and alighting on him. And a voice from heaven said, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased." And this is the gospel of the Lord. It is my habit on Monday to take a look at what the gospel is going to be for the following Sunday. I do it again on Wednesday. You kind of like get it into you, remembering it, and you walk around every now and then, remind yourself, what am I going to be preaching on this Sunday? And you kind of blend what you're thinking about in terms of that reading with what you see going on in the world. And I happen to be taking out on Friday some writings that I had put together, and one of them was my worst times as a pastor. And some of it was comical, but I began to realize that during those years I had unfortunately had to witness an awful lot of tragedies in the churches that I served, sitting on the bed of a 20-year-old young man with his parents for 24 hours till he breathed his last from a brain tumor. Going to give the final prayers for a man who had committed suicide but was still alive when I got there. A 25-year-old young man who became mentally unbalanced and who I tried to get into help with a psychiatrist but was too late, getting that phone call from his parents to say that he had taken his own life. And these were times where I began to stop and think about where the graciousness of God could be. And as I was thinking about these things, a little TV was on in the kitchen, and I go in the kitchen every morning and I take the carafe and I fill it with water, and while I'm filling it, I'm hearing the story of this area of West Virginia, which is without water because of chemical overspill from a local company, and how they can't drink the water. And I'm watching the water go in the carafe, and it's clear and it's clean. Put it into the coffee maker and wait for a while, and then sit with the coffee and think about the baptism of Jesus. And as I look at the text, I see to myself, well, John is protesting because he thinks he should be baptized by Jesus, and Jesus says, no, it's proper for us in this way to fulfill all righteousness. And I began to ponder and think, what does he mean, fulfill righteousness? And I guess what I came up with was, there are things in this world that are right, that we inherently know that are right, and that we inherently know that are wrong. And probably the two best words that fulfill both of those oppositions would be love and hate. And in the world in which hate seems to be predominating at times in the world, we want to know that there is love of some kind. And I wanted to know, as I look back upon the tragedies that I had to witness, was there love involved? Was there something that I wasn't seeing? And I had to recall that in the baptism in which we splash water on people here, children, adults, and so on, There is not so much magic, and I think that has been a problem in the church. That for a long time we looked upon baptism as some type of magic, that somehow something happened at that moment that belonged only to those who are baptized, and for those who are not, they're in trouble. And I've seen that happen over and over. Indeed, even during the Reformation in Geneva, John Calvin took the words of John's Gospel in which Jesus says to the Pharisee Nicodemus, "Unless you are born of water and the Spirit, you cannot enter the kingdom of heaven." And those words were kidnapped into a theology that simply said, "Hooray for me for being saved, too bad for you who are not." And what happened at that moment, I think in time, is it solidified, it calcified into a belief that this was a magic formula. And we even had nurses in hospitals baptizing children who were in danger of death because of the fear if they did not, they would not see the face of God. But alongside, throughout all the centuries, was another theology that was there, living, subdued somewhat, and it's only since the ecumenism of the last 50 years that we have rediscovered that baptism really, in reality, is the taking on of what love is all about. It is the taking on of the opposite of what hate is. And it is that incorporation of something of a memory that we can bring to ourselves that says, there was a point in time, even if I was an infant, where something was done to me. And in that doing, I have come to know myself better when I think about it. And I think Luther was correct. He said, you know, when we think about who we are as baptized people, one of the things we want to recall is every day, it is almost as if we die to who we are at times in our own life and our own brokenness, and in the remembrance of our baptism, we are becoming something new. And I thought of that as I read the first reading from Isaiah and that classic ending that he has. And it says, "I am the Lord, that is my name. My glory I give to no other. See, former things are past, and new things I now declare. Before they spring forth, I tell you all about them." And so as I look out upon all of you and I think upon my own baptism, I think that as a community of baptized people, it is not so much that we remember something that happened in the past, but something that's happening to us every day in the remembrance of who we are when the waters were thrown over our head and the words were spoken in the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. That every day that we are allowed to wake up, we are allowed to serve humanity. That's why that theme of last fall was so critically important. It is God's work, but it's our hands. And so the remembrance of baptism is a critical thing in our lives, and I don't think I remember it as much as I should, although every time I walk into the church, what faces me first is that beautiful glass shell that holds the water and the remembrance. And I'm wondering if at times what I need to do is every time I see it is just to touch it, even momentarily, and remind myself of who I am and what God has called me to be, and what God calls you to be too. I'm thinking next week we have one service at 10 o'clock and it's going to be followed by an annual meeting. And you're going to, and hopefully you will be here and you look at what happened last year and what we propose to do for this year, our plans, our hopes, our dreams. And I'm thinking of those words of Isaiah, "Behold, everything is come past." What happened last year here in this church in 2013 is now happening to give way to 2014. There is some incredibly good news in those reports that you're going to read. They'll be put online for you to look at before you come to the annual meeting. Vince Riedinger was thrilled because he remembers 2 years ago when the end of the year came, we were in the red by $750. Last year we were positive at $7,000. And this year, because of your generosity, that $7,000 has gone to $18,000. And what that money does is it gives us the power to exercise our baptism. to do those things that are incredibly important in which we touch the lives of other people. And we're going to do it together, not just alone or a solo act, because baptism also incorporates us, as it says, sons and daughters, children. We're kids of God. And it really doesn't matter how old we get. The idea that you can have that type of open enthusiasm that a child has when it discovers something new. And I think that's what we're called to do in our baptism, is to take a look at it every now and then and say, what happened when God chose to be gracious to me? At a moment in time, perhaps, that I don't even remember because I was a child, or with Aaron this morning because I baptized him as an adult. But we're all the same, aren't we? The real question is, what does that confer upon us and what does it do? And that is something that only you can find out in the individuality of your own life, your own gifts, your own power, your own being, your own spirit. And it will be unique because no one else will do it as well as you do. And so when all of these gifts and this power comes together in a community that decides that we are a baptized community and we understand who we are now, we can become something that is open to what God calls new things. And I'm telling you all about them, says this God. And the Spirit moves in all of that, as it did over the waters in the story of Genesis, where it says the world was cold and dark and brooding, and the Spirit of God came, and there was life. And that same Spirit is the same today as it was then, so I guess the only question is, what do you want to do? And with that idea in mind, bring to us, to your community here, a new idea, a new thought. Let it come through your body, through your mind, express it, don't be afraid. So many times, I think in churches, we look at, for example, the church council. Oh, they're the people who make all the things happen. They make all the decisions. But in some churches, we have what we call councils that are what you might call permission giving. We tried this in my last church, and the idea was this. If anybody had an idea of how to express the baptism of all the people, they bring it to the church council, and unless it's some type of heretical thing, which it rarely is, the answer is always yes. The answer is, why don't you give it a try? Of course, if it's something where they need $10,000 suddenly, we have to think that over very carefully. But most of the time, these people think of things that cost practically nothing. And when they do, all kinds of new things and ideas inspire us. I think when I'm looking at, I think about Jerry Grass, and someone came to me and said, do you know that there's a special booklet, a prayer book that you can send to people who are in the service? And so we ordered it, and yes, Tammy sent it now. We'll give it to you, Aaron, before you are deployed again, for you to take with you. And inside it will say, from your family here at St. Luke. That was an incredibly beautiful idea. Something else we have started, and looking at Bill now, he is a person with the Stephen ministry, and he has a person who he brings communion with. And I'm going to be talking to the Stephen ministers and saying, anybody who does Stephen ministry can also be what we call an extraordinary minister of the Eucharist. That you can take communion and bring it to any one of the people that you're serving, especially if they're bedridden or if they can't get out, if they're homebound. That was an idea that was brought up in my very first church by someone who came to me and said, isn't there something called extraordinary minister of the Eucharist? And I said, yes. Could we do that? I said, yeah, I think we could. Sure, why not? And throughout all of that stuff, when I think of some of the tragedies that I had to think about and be part of, it was always counterbalanced with people coming forth with the concept of who they were as baptized people. And they brought forth beautiful ideas. And I can only imagine if any of you, at any given time, in your solitude of prayer or at that moment where all of a sudden the Spirit strikes, be brave. Bring it to the church. Allow us to look at it. allow us to think it over and ask ourselves, is this the Spirit working through, oh, I don't know, Matt? And if it is, should we listen? Yes. Because that is how the church was built. And so today, we have the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus being baptized, and then coming out of that water, it says, a voice is heard, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." And in the waters of baptism at that moment in a time of your life, those same words come from heaven to you. "This is my daughter, in whom I am well pleased, my Son, in whom I am well pleased." So, thanks be to God for baptism of Jesus into the righteousness of what love was all about, rather than the opposite of what hate was supposed to be. For you who are baptized, I pray that the Spirit come and dwell with you, and somehow in this coming year, 2014, it will be true what Isaiah said. "Behold, the former things have passed, and a new thing I now declare to you. Before they spring up, I tell you of them." And Isaiah speaks to us of a God that says, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. The only question is, the surprise will be, who brings it about? And it could be you, if you remember who you are as the baptized adopted child of God.